process, right? We're going to start with preparing the offer and then writing the offer, presenting the offer, and then you're going to switch places briefly and become a listing agent in receiving that offer. So we'll just kind of walk through that slowly. And please interrupt me with any questions that you have along the way, because you should be asking questions along the way. In negotiating with other agents, I like to think of sales as the ability to gracefully persuade, not manipulate a person or persons into a win-win situation. It's not about winning the deal. It's about working with the other agent and coming up with, you know, something that works for both the buyer and the seller. So just know that you're not necessarily competing, you're working with. And I think that's important because sometimes you feel like you are competing. So the process obviously starts with the buyer making an offer, okay? And we're going to go through this in detail. This is just kind of a quick little grab right now. But the buyer makes an offer, and then the seller's going to respond in one of three ways. They can counter that offer, they can accept it, or reject it, okay? And we're going to kind of walk through this. So in preparing the offer, okay, what is something that you're going to obtain before you even take a buyer out and about to look at homes? What's the first thing you're going to obtain?
Pre-qualification.
Thank you. Yes. Pre-qualify your buyers before you even show them a property. How sad would it be to find the perfect property to later find out they can't qualify for said property? So before writing an offer, let's just assume that you have found the perfect home, okay? Or maybe they've driven by it and they've seen a for sale sign in the yard and they've said, I want that house, I want to make an offer. The first thing that you as their buyer's agent is going to do is just make sure it's still available. A lot of times that's not updated, or there's not an under contract sign on, you know, or tag on the sign. So just double check the status of that property. And then in building rapport with the listing agent on that property, I make it a standard practice to make a phone call. You know, on that very first reach out, it's a phone call. And later on that it might become emails and text messages, but just to really get to know kind of where the seller is at in their situation, inquire about the activity. And are there other offers on the property? If so, and they fell through, why did they fall through? What can you get? All the information you can. You want that in your in your corner when you go to write the offer. Some of it can be very helpful information. Then you want to find out the seller's motivations and what are their needs. In other words, it's not always about price. It's not always about an amazing offer. It could be, you know, how much are they putting down? Do they have any contingencies? There are a lot of things. Sometimes they need to sell quickly and get out of the state as fast as possible. So price may not be number one, but, you know, a quick close might be their number one. So those are the kinds of things that you want to find out when you're talking to this listing agent. And then just out of courtesy, how do you want to receive the offer? You know, ask them how they want to receive it. Do they want it presented in person? Do they want it emailed? And if so, what email would they like it sent to? Or a lot of times, you know, the email on the MLS is not the email that they prefer it to go to for whatever reason. So, and then most importantly, to set yourself apart, because some agents do not do this, is to put together a CMA or comparative market analysis for your buyer and just come up with a value on that home to figure, you know, the pricing on how you want to approach this home. So those are very important. Keep in mind all of these things. Number one, pre-qual letter before you even sit down and even talk about it. Okay, so now we're going to get to writing the offer. What I want to do is I want to go to the MLS and walk you guys through. I'm going to pull up a listing report and we're going to walk through the REPC. I know if you came to my class, we separated off into partners and kind of wrote up offers that way, one pretending to be the buyer's agent and one the buyer, and just kind of working together to get through that. Many questions came up while doing that. So I think it's going to be most helpful for me to actually walk through the REPC step by step and fill this out with you guys. So, okay. Let's see. we can go through these just briefly, but I mostly want to just show you. So obviously you got to gather that pre-approval letter, and then you're going to go through all of this. Let me just jump over to, it's going to be easier to do this. Here we go. Get over here. Okay. So I picked a random property here, and let's just do our best. You guys know where to find all your contracts and all that on the MLS, I hope. Right? Right. Okay. So in looking at this contract, I'm just going to fill out some of the basics here, right? We're putting in today's date. And AB buyer is offering to purchase from CD seller the property here and deliver earnest money. So let's talk about earnest money to start off. What is a typical earnest money? Do you guys know what is a reasonable amount to offer as earnest money?
1%.
Yeah, 1 to 1.5% is standard. When would you offer more earnest money? In what scenario would you want to maybe offer more?
Counter offer.
Okay. Or just to build your offer up to make it look better if you're against other competing offers. That's another time that you're going to want to maybe up your earnest money. Typically 1 to 1.5%. Okay, so let's just say on this property we've got listed at $549.9. It's been on the market for 71 days. So let's just, for pretend purposes, let's say that you qualify up to $525 on your pre-qualification, and you pull up this property, madly in love with it. You want to go in and you want to offer $500,000 and just see what happens. So let's just say, so earnest money, let's just do $5,500. Okay. And then you're going to talk to your buyer about how they want to deliver that earnest money. It might be by a personal check or a wire. Okay. Whatever that may be, you want to put that in there. And then our property address, 6283 South Granada Drive, City of Salt Lake. And you're just pulling all of this off of this MLS report. Have you guys looked through MLS reports and you're familiar with them and where to find all the information?
Yes.
Okay. Who has written a contract? Any of you written a contract yet?
In your class, it was helpful.
Just for practice? Okay. So tell me what the tax ID number is on this listing. Somebody. I just want to make sure you know where to find it. So.
Sorry, I'm driving right now. Otherwise, I would.
Oh yeah, safety first. Kelsey, how about you? What's the?
22, 21,
Right.
231,
Okay.
005, right under the subdivision.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So looking at included items, down here is where you're going to find the inclusions that they have listed here. That does not mean if they have not listed it here that you can't ask for it, right? Everything's negotiable. So let's say that you, I don't know, let's see. So we got the range, microwave, refrigerator. Let's just say they have a washer and dryer, and you just want to include that and see if they'll take it, because you need a washer and dryer. So you click washer, dryer. They've already said the fridge is included and the microwave. Okay. Now, sorry, this is blocking me a little bit. I gotta move your lovely faces over here. Okay. Okay, so, and then we're gonna go to, and if there's anything else, like let's just say there's a swing set or just something random that, you know, you want to ask for and see if they'll include it. And then if there's nothing else, just there are not any additional than what's listed here. And as far as excluded items, they don't show any exclusions here. So we'll just put none. As far as water service is concerned, what do you guys know about water?
Water rights?
Do you know what water shares are?
Yes.
Okay. So anyway, as far as water rights and shares, those can be sold separately. With this contract, they're being conveyed or transferred with the, with the contract. So there's not anything excluded from this sale. We're just assuming it is all there. We used to have to reiterate, includes all shares attached to the property, but okay, so what did we say our purchase price is going to be? Item or section 2. We're gonna shoot for 500,000, right? See what happens. And what's our earnest money that we filled in up top?
5,500.
Okay. So let's say your new loan amount is 400,000. Tell me what the balance of purchase price in cash at settlement. What are they gonna have to bring to the table to make up the difference? This is something that many got stumped on in the class, so I want you guys to really know this well. So these numbers need to add up to our purchase price over here of 500,000, right? So what is the balance brought to closing?
94,500.
Nice. Good. Okay, so you understand that, right? So the earnest money belongs to the buyer. Okay, so that's going to be applied at closing towards their down payment. So they just need to make up the difference. So these come to the total of 500,000. Okay, does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Clear as mud. Okay. So here, section 2.2, sale of buyer's property. Is it conditioned upon the buyer selling property? We're going to say it's not. But if it is conditioned upon the buyer selling their residence first, what do we have to include with the Rep C? You guys know what addendum needs to be?
Due on sale?
Not due on sale. No, it's just the subject to addendum. Subject to the sale of buyer's property addendum. Okay, that would have to be attached if it was conditioned upon that. But we're saying that it's not. So we're going to move forward here. Let's see. Settlement and closing. Okay, so settlement shall take place no later than the settlement deadline referenced in section 24, which we'll get to. The closing, what is the difference between settlement and closing? Had to be a test question. How are they different?
Settlement is where you sign all the contracts.
Correct. And closing?
And after closing is after it's recorded and funded and they get their keys.
Perfect.
Did I do it right?
Yep, you did.
Okay.
Nice. And then possession. So 3.3 possession. Right here, you can put, like, if it's a vacant home, I'll often put upon recording. If it's, they've got a ton of stuff to get out of there, sometimes just as a kindness for them to be happy about our offer, I'll put in 48 hours after recording. So after it's officially been transferred, they still would have 2 days to get their things out. So it's kind of a courtesy if you're trying to impress the seller. Down here on prorations and special assessments. So this is a tricky one for people.
Hey, Lindsey.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier about making that call to the seller to see what's important to them.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably a question you'll ask, right? Like, do they need time to move out? Several years ago, I bought a property and I went to do my inspection of the property and the seller was there. And so he was talking to me how he just needed time to get all the stuff out because he did have a lot of stuff. And so my offer, I gave him 30 days to get out. And I got the offer, or I got the property because I gave him 30 days. So yeah, just listening to things that you can add in definitely help out.
Yeah, for sure. So when you're talking to that agent and trying to, gain some rapport, just take notes on what they're saying and try to incorporate that wherever you can in the Rep C that's going to, impress them. On the special assessments, this can be with an HOA related property or not. This could just be municipal improvements, like streetlights, or this could be a lot of things, HOAs, the last house that I sold, they had like 10 years they were given to replace all the roofs in the development. That's something the HOA decided on. So in just knowing that in special assessments, again, it can all be based on your conversation on what you find that the seller really wants, but I'll typically put split equally, just because if it's something that was agreed upon by the seller, but the buyer ends up, not only benefiting from it, but they didn't get to make the decision on this. I usually put split equally between buyer and seller. And that could be countered back and they could say, no, it's the obligation of the buyer. So everything's negotiable. Just remember that, okay? On payment obligations, are you guys familiar with, let's just say you were writing an offer on this townhome and it's currently being rented and there's a lease on it for another 60 days. Tell me what that would look like. How would that be handled? What is the seller obligated to give to you? And what are your obligations as a buyer purchasing this property, if there's a current lease on the property?
Seller's disclosure.
Okay, so let's look here at 4.3, okay? So it talks about rents and deposits, prepaid rents, all of that. You guys know the general rule there. If you're purchasing a property that currently has a lease on it, you as the new owner still have to honor that lease. Okay? So even if you wanted to move in after closing and you wanted to give them 48 hours to move out, if there's a lease on that, you're going to wait 2 months before moving into this property. You have to honor the current lease in place. So that's just something to keep in mind, okay? And there's always a transfer fee of sorts for HOA. Like you'll look over here on this listing and it says HOA transfer is 0.5%, okay? So knowing that it's 0.5%, there is that change of ownership fee that the HOA charges. And so what are you going to do? You're going to have seller pay that, buyer pay it, or split it between the two. Again, I usually split it between the two.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So as far as like the rental agreements, if you're buying a property and there's a rental there, does there have to be like a contract to back that up? Like to kind of prove that, or just by word, you would have to honor that?
There needs to be contracts because they have to provide all of that with their seller's disclosures. They have to provide all, rents, warranties, all kinds of stuff with the seller's disclosures, right? So at that time, they would provide you with all of that information.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Let's see. So confirmation of agency disclosure, I still get agents not filling this out. And it's not something that I can't handle or add to an addendum when responding, but it's just laziness. So please just fill out your contracts. So tell me let me scroll down for you. What's the agent's name representing the seller based on this? Based on this MLS report? Who's the listing agent?
Catherine.
Catherine Lobb. Okay. Any of you know how to find out Catherine Lobb's license number that we have to put in right here below?
Her through MLS.
Yeah, so you can just jump out of this, go up here to this search button and type in her name, Catherine Lobb. What did I spell wrong? L-A-U-B. There she is. Okay. So we'll see here, her license number is right underneath her name. Okay. So we're going to fill that in. Okay. And who's her broker? Can you see that here in this same information? You can see that she's with Homey. Okay. That's her brokerage. I click on Homey and it pulls up the office license. So we need both the agent's license number and the office license number on the contract. Okay, so seller's brokerage is Homey. That license number is 104-11694. Okay. So they're representing the seller. And when you log into the MLS to write up an offer, your information is going to auto-populate in these fields here. So you'll just have to make sure that you click, I'm representing the buyer, my brokerage is representing the buyer, okay? So title and title insurance. I mean, Marcel, how lucky am I to have you here to take over this section?
Very excited.
Yeah, so explain to them title insurance and how it works with the seller and how it works with the buyer.
Yep, so you got two policies. So in the contract, it's having the seller pay for the owner's policy. And that's always going to be the case. Well, I can't say always, that's 99% of the case. The only time that a lender's policy comes into play is, you know, that's a requirement of the lender, but that's not necessarily anything that's on the contract. So the owner's policy, again, majority of the time is covered by the seller, and it covers, pretty much ensures your buyer that the home's free and clear. There's no boundary line issues, taxes, liens, divorces, other settlements that might cloud the title and you know, have someone knock on the door asking for money. And so that, in a sense, is providing a free and clear title. And that's, again, normally a seller's expense. Your buyer, if they're doing a loan, will have a lender's policy that they'll purchase, and that insures the lender. So it doesn't protect the homeowner. All, it's the owner's policy that does.
So, in asking everybody except for Marcel, if a buyer's paying cash for a property, do they have to pay for a title insurance policy? Anyone?
Yes.
No.
No. No. So on the
Okay.
buyer's end, it's just to insure the lender. So if there's no lender, then there's no requirement to purchase title insurance, just on the seller side.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so another thing I wanted to cover here on section 7, seller's disclosures, you know, we have that seller's disclosure document that we send over to future buyers, right? But I want to make sure that you guys understand what is all included in the seller's property condition disclosure, okay? It's not just that document, right? It's all encompassing. Look at this, A through K. These are all the items, whether like the leases that we talked about, that has to be provided during that seller's disclosure timeline, because we're going to put a deadline to that as well in section 24 here in just a bit. But yeah, so this property is an HOA, right? So let's see, where did we go? Bring it back. So this property falls under HOA. So we would need to get CC&Rs. We need to get the most recent minutes for the homeowners association. There's a lot of things to gather. So make sure when you're writing offers on townhomes and condos and homes that are in a PUD that you pay attention. If they have an HOA attached to them, what does that mean? What do you need to include as a buyer's agent in your offer on these properties? Okay. So buyer's condition of purchase. Okay, due diligence condition. What is due diligence? Who can tell me what is that? What is that time frame for exactly?
So quiet tonight. You guys,
So quiet.
so quiet.
So this is when your buyer is going to perform any testing that they want done on the property, or literally check out, get bids from contractors, whatever that looks like. They're doing all of their homework on gathering information. It might be whether or not they can get a permit to build an ADU, or it could be anything. Due diligence is for your inspections, you know, your meth testing, any of that stuff. So we're going to put that this is conditioned upon due diligence. So you have time to look into those things that are most important. So based on page 1, we're getting a loan, right? So therefore we have to get an appraisal because you can't get a loan on a property without an appraisal. So it's going to be conditioned on an appraisal. So what does that mean? So if the appraisal comes in low, what does that mean? Do they have a right to cancel? Does your buyer have a right to cancel if that appraisal comes in low?
Yes, they have a right to cancel, or maybe you can negotiate that they'll come down on the price to meet the appraisal,
Right.
or they can decide if they want to pay cash in the difference.
Right. So what if that appraisal comes in low and it's after the appraisal deadline? Then what happens?
Then you could be in trouble.
Yeah. So it's your job as the buyer's agent to keep track of these deadlines. This is your most important job. Once you've submitted a contract, is to pay attention to these deadlines and make sure your buyer does not lapse on these deadlines. Okay. If you have to ask the seller for an extension, so be it, but do not let these deadlines lapse if things are still being figured out. Okay. So working our way down, 8.3 financing. So if this is a cash deal, you're going to click on this button here that says no financing required. But in our deal, there is financing required. So we're going to click this button here.
Hey,
Okay.
Lindsay,
Yeah.
for you. So what do you do as an agent as you kind of set these diligence deadlines, appraisal deadline, financing deadline? Do you personally like put those into your calendar so you're notified? How do you
Yes.
yourself?
Yes.
Okay.
100%. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Okay. So buyer's right to cancel before the financing and appraisal deadline. I want to go over this a little bit. If buyer, in buyer's sole discretion, is not satisfied with the terms and conditions of the loan, buyer may, after the due diligence deadline referenced in 24B, cancel the REPC by providing written notice to seller no later than the financing and appraisal deadline referenced in 24C, whereupon X amount of buyer's earnest money deposit shall be released to the seller. So I know this sounds a little bit complicated, but at what point would you, I want you to think about this. At what point would you put money in here? You know, let's just say 500, we're just agreeing will be released if we cancel after due diligence. Thoughts on when you would put this in? Typically, I'm putting 0 in this line, but when would you offer to release?
Wouldn't it be if you decided to ask for an extension of the either the appraisal or the mortgage?
Yeah, so if you're extending that appraisal financing condition, or your lender can't get things done in time, but you're confident that it can happen, it's just you want to do a rapid rescore or whatever it might be on your loan, you're willing to relinquish 500 in earnest money, okay, just to keep the seller happy and keep them on the hook. So any questions on that?
Would you ever go over 500 or?
Oh yeah, I mean, that's all just depending on the contract, of course, but on a typical contract, I don't want my buyer to release any earnest money at all. So I'm going to put 0. Okay. And just see what we can make work with that. Along those lines down here, 8.4 additional earnest money deposit. When would you add earnest money to a deal? Very similar to that situation that we just talked about.
If you're going up against other offers?
Sure. Yeah. Also, I had a deal that was in escrow for 2 months. The seller was willing to drag it out, and that was because we offered to add additional earnest money after the due diligence period. Okay. So with this offer, we're not going to, because this is not multiple offers. Okay, now with this contract, I want you guys to pay attention to the listing and what we talked about before on page 1. Tell me, based on the year built what addenda are required with this contract?
Lead paint addenda.
Yes, disclosure and acknowledgement is what is required here because it's built prior to 78, right? So those are all the little details that you've got to pay attention to when you're looking at these listings, and just be prepared. Read every single line on this REPSI and make sure that you have filled it out thoroughly based on this listing. What if I'm related to the buyer? What am I going to add on an addendum?
You have to add a line acknowledging your relationship.
Right. It's called disclosure of interest. Okay. So for that sake, let's just say that I am related to the buyer. So I'm just indicating here that there is an addendum, and it is addendum 1. And then also on the other is lead-based paint. Now on these listings, this is a PDF, but on these listings, you're going to see, let me get out of this so we can see this actually. So we'll go in here and you'll see attached documents. So anything in here on a listing that is older than 78, they have to attach the lead-based paint. Okay. So what you would do in this situation is the seller's already filled this out. So you would print this out, have your buyer sign it, and include it with your offer. Okay. So, oh sure, now you get to where I can't even reach my X button. Okay, anyway. So, home warranties. Do you guys know about home warranties? And is that a standard of practice in our area? Is that something that we include in our contracts? Anybody know? Does that sound familiar?
Include them in mine.
What's that?
I include them in mine in a standard practice.
Okay. Yep.
For usually up to 500, and I have it where the buyer gets to choose, but the seller has to pay.
Okay. Yeah, that's typical. That's typically what you'll see. So home warranty plan will be included in this, and it will be ordered by the buyer, and you can assist with this as the buyer's agent, and a company selected by the buyer, but paid for by the seller. And I'll usually put 700 because they're just costing more money now. So it just covers that, whether it's, you know, $650, $700, it's built in there. Okay. So let's jump to pre-settlement walkthrough inspection. When are you doing a final walkthrough? And what is a final walkthrough? What does that mean?
Typically, is it 24 hours before closing?
Yeah, so here it says no earlier than 7 days prior to settlement. Right? And what are you doing? What is that? What's the purpose of a walkthrough? Why are you going through the property again?
Just to make sure it's not damaged.
Mm-hmm. And everything
Sure, they
there
left
is
the
as promised?
appliances.
Yeah. You go back to our inclusions. If they agree to the washer and dryer, is the washer and dryer there, or did they accidentally take it? Because that's happened before. Okay. And if there's any changes during the transaction, right? We talked about the rentals, the leases, those kinds of things. If anything changes with that, you have to be notified by the seller of anything, you know, whether it be with property management agreements, anything like that has to be agreed once you're under contract. Okay. And then mediation, this, I mean, Terry, what do you do on this? Because everyone's different. I just do May because I don't like people telling me what I have to do. But this is just basically stating that if there's any dispute related to this contract, that you may, at the option of buyer and seller, go to mediation. Some people click shall go to mediation. So what do you do, Terry?
Yeah, I was always taught I do put shall, just because that way, 9 times out of 10, a mediation can resolve it.
Mm-hmm.
He with the most money, she with the most money is going to win if we go to court, has always been my thinking.
Yeah.
However, I have had a scenario where I had a pretty hardcore client And he was extremely upset that he was forced to go to mediation first. He wanted to be able to sue somebody if he wanted to sue someone. So I did learn from, and that's only happened to me once, but he was very adamant about being able to sue somebody. So I like May at this point just because of that. So.
All right, thanks. Okay, so tell me what happens if you forget about that deadline date for the due diligence and you find out that the house is full of termites or something. Your results come back after your deadline and the buyer no longer wants to move forward with this property. What's happening here?
Losing that earnest money.
That's right. Yeah. So again, as an agent, it's on you to stay on top of those deadlines and request an extension, see what you can do, or cancel the contract before that deadline so you're protecting your buyer's earnest money. Okay.
The seller also asks for more money.
Sure. I mean, everything's negotiable. Remember that. Yeah. So what happens if a seller defaults? How do they get, they don't have earnest money on the table. So how does that work? I don't know if you guys go over this in your class. So they would return the earnest money, but then they could also, buyer could request that they come to the table with an equal amount of earnest money that the buyer had put down. Did you guys cover that at all in your pre-licensing classes? Okay.
Lindsey, is that the most that the buyer could get from the seller?
No, because it all depends on what the issue is. So let's see, where did it talk about the?
I've had a few scenarios where, for whatever reason, the seller at the last minute cold feet or,
Yeah.
whatever. And so they were going to go through with it. And, the buyers were put into a bad situation. They've, maybe moved out of their apartment. They,
And it cost them more money than what was available with the earnest money.
It was right at the 11th hour. And so, anyway, if they say the earnest money's, $1,500, that's not going to cover much for a buyer.
Right. And the buyer can choose to go that way or take them to court,
Yep.
and go that route. So, okay. No assignment of the rep C. So you cannot assign the rep C to another party. Have you seen this, Marcel, where they have assigned it to another party aside from themselves as an owner of an LLC?
Yes, and you see that really more on like flips and whatnot. So someone might go on a contract and put it to where they can assign it.
Yeah.
And then maybe they, in a sense, wholesale it to another investor.
Yeah.
But that's the only time I see that come to play.
And that can't be done without the seller's written consent. So that's the point of me bringing that up. So, okay. Time is of the essence. This is a good one because a lot of times I'll have agents call me and they'll say, due diligence deadline is May 31st, but what does that mean? Does that mean midnight on May 31st? It means 5 p.m. And that's what this time is of the essence clause is about. Performance under each section of the Rep C, which references a date, shall absolutely be required by 5 p.m. on that stated date. So it's a good one to know because it's something that comes up often. Okay, so what is acceptance? What does acceptance mean?
When all the parties have agreed.
Yes. Yes. And what happens right after acceptance? What has to happen within 4 days after acceptance?
Earnest money.
Thank you. Okay, so let's fill out some dates here real quick. So on seller's disclosure, how much time are we giving them to get that documentation? And again, be sensitive to the fact that this is an HOA property, right? They need to obtain minutes, CC&Rs, all of the things. What are we gonna give them on a timeline?
7 days,
Huh?
7 days.
Oh, that's too generous.
Ah, okay. I was trying to be nice.
Unless you're trying to buy time, you know, and you're stretching out your closing and you want to just get a little bit more on each. The typical is just a few days. So we'll just give them till next Tuesday to provide us with all of that information. Your due diligence deadline. What is a realistic due diligence deadline? Let's say they want meth tests, they want radon tests, they want all of the things. They want an interior decorator to walk through and give them a bid. So
14 days.
yeah, 14 days is good. If you've got a competing offer on the table, it's important for you to find that information out and maybe shorten up these deadlines and try to, you know, quicken your close date or whatever that is. Remember going back to that building rapport with the listing agent. What is important to them? So if it's a short due diligence, then let's look at a 10-day due diligence. But anyway, we'll stretch it out to what, the 13th? And then financing appraisal. Again, that's something you want to have a conversation with the lender about as well, making sure that they feel comfortable in the timeline in which they can get that appraisal completed in time, because we're all about protecting the deadline dates, right? So we're stretching that out. Let's say, let's just say the 25th, okay? And then settlement, I mean, a typical closing timeline is a month, right? But a lot of lenders can close a deal in 3 weeks. So it's all dependent on your situation. Let's say you lease a property, your lease isn't up till the end of the month, or, you know, you have 30 days left. You want to stretch that out. You want to make it work for you too. Did I interrupt you, Marcel?
Well, I was just going to say, it's good to have a calendar out. So I had 2 deals that their settlement deadline was on Monday, Memorial Day.
Uh-huh.
So you just want to look at, so you don't put
Holidays, yeah.
your lender in a tight spot when you're
Sure.
doing a holiday or a bank, you know, just kind of be careful.
Yeah. Okay.
I would also include weekends. I've had agents that will give me a deadline like on a Sunday night for a seller to respond to repairs or something. And a lot of people don't want to work on Sundays or be bothered on Sundays. So
Right.
I pay attention to weekends too.
Yeah.
Well,
Is it possible to close a home in less than 21 days, or is that like the ultimate, like the bare minimum of what it takes?
I mean, my lender was closing a regular conventional loan in 17 days. So, I mean, it all just is dependent on the lender and how savvy they are and how efficient they are and their whole team is. So that's why it's very individual.
And you also want to be careful. There might be certain days that are not holidays, but they're put in tight spots. So let's say, for example, Black Friday, right? Not too many people are up on a Black Friday. I think this year, 4th of July is on a Thursday. So you don't want to put like July 5th as a major day to get something done,
Right.
because people might take a long weekend. So
Yeah.
just be mindful of little things like that.
Yeah. Okay, so let's just typical deal 30-day close. Let's just say our settlement deadline, let's do the 27th. Close enough, right? So tell me, let's back it up. And what is it that we had to put on the addendum? Because I'm related to the buyer, remember that? So are you guys familiar with the available clauses that are built into the addendum on the MLS that you can drag and drop? If not, I'm here to tell you, you can drag and drop. So disclosure of interest is what we have to do, right? So I just drag that over here and then I load that selected clause and it just builds it into the addendum right here, item number 1, okay? So personal interest, the buyer is either a relative of a real estate broker. So that would be, you know, me, if it's somebody I'm related to, or a real estate broker or sales agent themselves. You'd click on this button here. Okay. So that's what we put in our addendum. Of course, you'd fill it out though, because you're not going to be one of those agents that doesn't fill it out. Any questions so far on that? Was it helpful? Is it, I know it's boring to go through a contract, but I think it's kind of the most important thing we can do, right? So any
Very helpful.
questions? Good.
I feel like a good indicator, if we handed you a buyer tonight and they picked a house out right now, would you feel comfortable filling that contract out? And if the answer is no, it's time to practice. Lots of practice.
And there, I mean, you really should at very minimum read through the Rep C 3 to 4 times a day and write up a contract. Just pick something off the MLS and do what we just did tonight. And going through it, there's nothing that's going to build more confidence in you when the time actually does come than if you were to just practice writing through it. So highly encourage that. Any other questions before we jump back to our next little section here? Nothing. Guys are so quiet. Okay. So, okay, we went through all of this fun stuff here in writing our offer. So now you're going to review this after you've filled everything out. Just review it with your buyer. Okay. Make sure they understand everything. Go through the details like the price, the deadlines, all of that stuff with them again. Okay. Avoid rookie agent mistakes. Ask questions, please. I'm a broker that has an open door. So if it's not me or your coaches, please reach out. Do not hesitate. So now you're ready to present the offer to the listing agent, right? You're double checking everything. You're making sure you have all of your initials on every page. It's dated on every page, signed where it's supposed to be signed, okay? And then based on that conversation you had with that listing agent, how do they want it delivered? Okay, you're going to actually deliver it in that way so that you are showing them that you actually listen to them. Order them logically. Don't put your addendum first and then your Rep C. Just, lay it out. Provide an email summary. So what I usually do is when I am sending a contract, I will say, here is an offer on your property, blah, 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 by my qualified buyer. And then I would just kind of get some bullet points where it just said purchase price, 500, earnest money, this much, due diligence deadline. If it's a quick due diligence and you want to impress them, like write all of those things in there. Just bullet point some of those items in the offer. And then let them know it's coming. Say, I'm sending over an offer right now. Okay. Add those documents to Command. I don't know if you guys are fully aware of Command or know enough about it to submit your documentation, and then let your buyer know it's been sent. So everybody is in the know on what's going on in this whole process along the way. Okay. So now we're just quickly going to kind of become the listing agent at this point. Okay. So now you've got an offer in your hand. Okay. We're wearing the listing agent hat. You're going to receive this offer and go over it. You're going to make sure it's complete. Again, same thing, checking for signatures, initials, everything's in the right place. You're going to confirm with the buyer's agent that you have received this offer. Okay. And then you're going to let the seller know in a timely manner and create a summary similar to what you put in your email, just to kind of go over things briefly as just a big picture, and then you'll break it down and walk through it with your buyer. Any questions, you're going to talk to the buyer's agent, right? To clarify some things. You don't want to just guess on what they mean by this or that. Open dialogue. Okay. You can contact the lender as just one of my value propositions. My lender reaches out to the agent immediately. That's just kind of one of those things. I have a great relationship with my lender, and anytime I submit an offer, he follows it up with a phone call, lets them know, they're qualified, and ask if they have any questions. So that's just something that you guys can build over time with the lender. And then create a net sheet. Title company, Marcel, all the guys over there, they have a net sheet that you can plug in different scenarios as you're presenting this offer to your sellers, and let them have the power in making that decision. You give them a scenario 1 here on how they want to respond, a scenario 2 and a scenario 3, and what their bottom line is going to look like in all of those scenarios. And it's a really easy spreadsheet. You literally plug in, you know, the earnest money, the closing costs, whatever it is into this document, and it just is a nice presentation. Okay, so you're, again, same thing on the listing side. You're going to put it in command as a contract. And then you're deciding, are you going to counter, accept, or reject? So what's important with this is, you know, 95% of offers are countered, right? They're rarely accepted out of the chute unless it's something like a cash close in 10 days or something and everything's just perfect. I never recommend rejecting an offer because I think there's, you know, there's always a way to at least negotiate or try. So if you don't at least try, the answer is always going to be no, right? So try to make it work. Yeah, I mean, I just want to answer questions at this point. So what are your concerns, I guess, as new agents? What is your biggest concern? With representing a buyer or a seller in reference to contracts? What is your biggest concern?
I was just gonna say, we have a few agents on here that have listings that are now receiving offers, so
Nice.
maybe questions on the listing side.
Yeah, either side.
How can I make sure that my offer stands out above other agents?
Well, you're first going to find out if you are competing against other agents, right? At the time that you're writing that offer. Because that, I mean, that's critical to know that information because that changes your offer completely if you know that there are others on the table. What else?
But how do I make it look better than theirs? Like, is there a way to like outdo them? Kind of like if we were talking Chevys, I'd just be putting a big block in it. Kind of like that, you know, like how do I take it up a level with the offer?
Yeah. Always bump up the earnest money is always a good way. If you're are you talking about on the buying side?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, any way to beef up your offer is literally good earnest money, a solid down payment, short deadline dates. Those are all attractive to a seller.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I've also heard of people saying that they submit their offers with the cover letter and that helps, or even like handwritten letters. Do you feel like you have ever seen that work?
There used to be a nice little standard of practice where we would have our buyers put together a lovely little letter that would convince the seller to go with them, but it's frowned upon now. They're called love letters to try and convince the seller to pick said buyer, but it's frowned upon now because there's this level of, what's the word? I mean, some of the fair housing issues come into play in talking about, oh, I have this family of, I have all these small children that will love to play in your backyard and whatnot. So it just kind of, it crosses that line, that fair housing line. And so that's not, a cover letter can just be something very simple. It doesn't need to be a letter. So don't make letters a standard of practice. Just, I've got a qualified buyer that's really excited about your property. They're moving here from wherever, and leave it at that. Just keep it simple. Don't mess with the love letters.
Thank you.
Ask the other agent too. How can I make my offer more attractive? You know, whatever that is. If they don't
Lindsay, I
like
have a question on that same line. How do you feel about, so I did have a scenario once where I was working with a buyer and we were walking through the house and her degree was hanging on the wall. And it was like one of the most unique degrees ever. Like my buyer literally flipped out, was like, no way, I don't know anybody that has this degree. It had something to do with hearing and ears or something.
Mhm.
And so I mentioned that to the listing agent. I was like, oh, you know, that it was great. My client noticed that your client is in this field and they were just so impressed by it. And then they picked our offer because she felt the same way, like a connection. So the listing agent clearly like relayed that. Do you feel like that's crossing any lines?
I mean, that's.
Like verbally doing it?
I don't think so. I mean, that's more of a commonality than it is. If it
Yeah.
crosses any fair housing or creates question marks with fair housing, don't say it, don't do it, you know? But something like that is very, I don't know. There's people that will, you know, look through their Ring doorbells as people are looking at their homes, right? And they're seeing that they bring their kids along or something, and they know that their neighbors don't want to have kids in the neighborhood or whatever. So that's, you know, just as an agent, don't get involved in that. Don't be a part of that decision making, you know? So again, can I please reiterate, come to your coaches, come to your broker with any questions prior to submitting an offer, or if you've received one on your listing and you want to bounce it off of people, if there's anything you don't understand, or you want another set of eyes or opinions on how to respond, please reach out. Do not hesitate. Okay?
Awesome.
All right.
Well, thank you so much, Lindsay. We appreciate you taking the time this evening to do this for us. Any other questions for her? We had a question this morning for her. I remember we were going to ask her. Does anybody remember what it was? I think it had to do with clear cooperation.
Oh, I remember it was wait, I just lost the thought.
We might have answered it. It might have been around the exclusion form. I just remember saying, we have Lindsay coming tonight. We'll ask her. But yeah, I think it had to do with clear cooperation and just, oh, Antonio, you did have the question. It was like a buyer's agent going and saying, I can find you properties off market. We advertise for those. How could you handle that and not be crossing over the clear cooperation? We kind of discussed that this morning, just being able to say, he was saying, how can we say we can get you properties off market that are not on the MLS?
I don't see a problem in that. I mean, there's nothing different than calling on expireds that didn't sell. I mean, that's no longer on market, and we're calling on those.
Yeah.
Circle prospecting around your open house. I mean, all of that those are off market ways in which to drum up.
Yeah, and I think we were talking about like if people put them in the Facebook groups and they're like, hey, I have a buyer who's looking for this, and then another agent will say, oh yeah, I have a seller who's going to be listing this. So my understanding is it's okay for us to do that because we're in a private group, but I also feel like that could be a gray line.
Okay, so you're talking within our brokerage?
Yes. Are we okay to do that because it's a private group? This was just kind of a whole discussion that came up this morning.
I mean, my answer is yes, because we're within the same brokerage.
Okay.
I mean, same reason why you can advertise other people's listings being within that brokerage, as long as you're giving them credit, you know, it helps everybody in the advertising piece.
Yep.
So.
Okay. I think that was it.
Okay.
Any other questions for her, you guys? Or me, or anyone?
You ladies have been fabulous. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Cody. Hey, you guys, have a fantastic night. We will see you tomorrow morning.
Have a good night.
Hey.
Hey.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Good night. You bet.